Let me tell a tale of a world where heroes walk among us, fighting through the darkness left by monsters and by selfish men. A tale of glory rents asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. Let me sing a song of a family forged by trials and woe. On their own they falter, but together they will write their own tale of glory rent asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. What was rent shall be restored, what was lost now shall be found. The price of valor ever rising, but victory brings new rewards. Tales of glory, might, and wonder, hard-fought battles, treasures won. Our heroes know their fate awaits them, and so they carry on.
Ah, here it comes. Technical
Boom.
ghosts.
Boom. There we go. Hello. What's up, everybody? Sorry for the little hiccup there. My default mic got set to the wrong thing. You don't care about that. You're here for some world building.
I
So
was
what's up,
actually
everybody?
here for some digital mic setup tips.
Okay.
but
Okay. Great.
Guess
Well,
I'm not
so
finding them.
no, it's cool. We can do that. I have an SSL 2 Plus interface here, and a
Incredible.
Shure SM7B running through a cloud lifter.
If it's not a Motu, I don't want to hear about it.
Okay. Well. Anyway, actually, we're not talking about audio tips.
Hey,
We are
folks,
actually
thanks for
talking about
joining
world
us.
building. What's up, everybody? It's me, Pixel, and joined as always by my good buddy Beast. What's up, Beast?
Hey, it's me, Beast.
How you
Hey,
doing?
folks. You know, working for the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Ready to talk about some world building.
Yeah, so we actually had the opportunity a couple weeks back. Our good buddy Jacob is running.
Thanks, Jacob.
Yeah, shout out Jacob. Our good buddy Jacob is running a sort of short side campaign in between arcs of our other off-stream game of Pathfinder 2E, and he's running a short campaign of Fabula Ultima, which is, if you guys don't know, a sort of JRPG inspired TTRPG, which is like kind of a mind bend, right? Because like the OG JRPGs were largely attempts to take Dungeons and Dragons and turn it into a video game, right? And then now somebody was like, hey, So you remember those Dungeons and Dragons video
It's
games?
an
What
onion
if we turned
parfait,
those back into Dungeons and Dragons? It's like, okay. But it's
That
very
just
cool.
sounds like all of my favorite things.
Yeah. Just like this, it's an Ouroboros of creative
Right.
direction here. So anyway, we got a chance to do a session 0. We haven't played the first episode of that off-stream game yet, but we got a chance to do a session 0 wherein we created characters and did a lot of world building, and we wanted to talk about, since we have this world building show that we do, we wanted to talk about like what we learned from that process and like what
it was honestly really
Yeah.
great. I thought it hit so many marks. And that we're going to talk about, and I'm excited to hear like what your favorites were, and I'm excited to see if they're the same or different from mine.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about like what tools it offered. We're going to talk about like the specifics of what we can take away, like if you're actually playing Fabula Ultima, why you might want to try it, like what we thought about the game itself up to the part, like we haven't played, but like what we thought about the process of world building in session 0 and stuff. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about like what are the generalizable tips, and we're not going to necessarily section those off. There's all going to be kind of smushed together, just what our impressions are. But yeah, that's kind of what we're doing today. So one of the things that we thought was really interesting about Fabula Ultima was the way that the game developers like thought really hard about like how would you make a tabletop game feel like a JRPG, right? And what I thought was interesting about that was a lot of times when we talk about world building, a lot of times we're kind of assuming that you're starting from like relatively a blank canvas, right? That
Right,
like
you might have like one idea, or like an idea for like a city or like a character, right? And it all sort of grows from that usually.
Yeah, exactly. So you maybe have like one cool idea that you've landed on, like a geographic feature or something about nature or the weather or magic or a specific like species of creatures that inhabits the place or a political system or some combination of things. You have like maybe one thing that kind of sparked your imagination, and a lot of the advice we give is like how do you build outward from that one idea or whatever, right? The thing with something like Fabula Ultima is they thought really hard about like what would make a game feel like a JRPG, which means they're starting not just with like one kernel of an idea about whatever the thing that they pick that's like the starting point. They're starting with like a whole vibe of like references and like genre and like just a big catalog of like all the JRPGs ever made that anyone might have ever played, and starting to think about like how would you translate some of the experience of that into a tabletop game. And so what we as Beast and I were kind of looking at this figured out is that like they give you a lot of tools to help you tailor the vibe of the game, right?
Vibe is like the perfect word to
Yeah.
describe how this game treats a lot of its decision making.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and I think that's something that is really important. I've heard other sort of like TTRPG commentators talk about this when you're analyzing any new system, right? Kind of one of the first places you want to start is looking at what kind of fantasy, not fantasy like with a capital F as in like elves and orcs and crap, but like fantasy as in what sort of imaginary space, right? What kind of fantasy is this game trying to offer? And then how does it mechanically support that fantasy, right? And that a game that can both offer an interesting and compelling fantasy, whether that's something like, you know, Mothership, the sci-fi horror RPG, right, has a particular fantasy of sci-fi horror versus that's also like sort of retro and trippy at the same time, versus, you know, something like this, right, that like identifying what that fantasy is and seeing how the game supports it is one way you start to sort of evaluate these things, right? So when we were looking at this, the question is like, well, what is the vibe of this game, right? Because they're like trying to recreate these feelings and experiences of a very different medium, which is video games, which is they're interrelated, right, but different.
Right.
So asking the question, and like this is, I think, one of the things that's maybe generalizable, right, is when you're looking at different like could be games, TTRPGs, but could also be like stories of any kind, movies, video games, comic books, whatever. Starting to like ask yourself the question, like, one, what is the vibe of the thing I'm consuming, and two, why does the vibe that way?
Mm.
Right? And the
Yeah, why is
reason,
the vibe vibing?
why does the vibe like that? Yeah. And the reason to look at that is so that you can start to understand the techniques that somebody else employed to make the vibe do that, so that when you want to create a particular vibe, you have some tools in your belt to be like, well, if I want it to feel kind of like Monster Rancher the anime, right? Like, what would I do to make that feel that way? Well, you start to like look at not just the like characteristics of plot and character and stuff like that, but like what are the sort of it's very hard to nail down this like less tangible things about like the vibe. Um so yeah, that's like the first thing that we kind of drew from this.
Oh, so I really liked how the game approached it, and it kind of distills a couple decades, 25, 30 years or so of JRPGs into
Yeah.
sort of three buckets to
Mm.
say like these are like the umbrella vibes, and then drilling down they give you a lot of other steps in the world building to like refine or deviate.
Yeah.
And it's like if I'm remembering it right, it's basically like you have your like typical fantasy, which is more of like that Western medieval Europe with magic kind of
Yeah.
thing.
They have the three things on offer are high fantasy, natural fantasy, and techno fantasy as far as what's
Right.
offered in Fabula Ultima itself.
So high fantasy is your Lord of the Rings and your Dragon Quest and
Yeah.
your uh that, right?
Yeah,
And then
and I
your
think actually
natural
while we're doing this, let me pull up some of like the images and stuff from this, just to sort of so like he like what because this again we're like this book like did some really cool stuff. So like your world could be
it's
high
very easy to
fantasy. So
read.
we're seeing a little wizard walking across a bridge to like a big fantasy town, you know, castles, crystal spires, princess losing the kingdom, veteran soldiers, and these are vibes, right? Like all of
Exactly.
this stuff that they're giving us here are just little story nuggets of like vibes that you could find in a high fantasy world. Sorry, I kind of interrupted though, but carry on.
No, and then you have the next bucket, which was I think natural fantasy,
Yes.
and that's your like Fern Gully,
Yeah.
kind of trying to think of what were some of the other examples in there. I think maybe Chrono Cross.
Yeah, I could see that. Yep. Let's see. Tales of natural fantasy often revolve around warmth and community, harmony with nature and beasts. Ooh, Miyazaki. Miyazaki is like a
Miyazaki.
major,
Boom. There
like
it
that's
is.
gonna land you in the bucket.
Yeah.
You
You
know?
you got your
Yeah, for
Nausicaa of the
sure.
Valley of the
Yes.
Wind. You got your oh my god, the one that every Princess Mononoke.
Yeah. Yep.
Um
Howl's Moving
that
Castle even.
that's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yes.
The natural fantasy.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
this savage versus civilized kind of
Yeah.
conflict. Nature is being consumed or threatened. Humanity is or society, civilization's expanding, and it's the inevitable friction of
Yeah.
when the two meet.
Exactly. So I
Um,
think like just stopping to look at the vibes of those two different things, like that was one thing that I thought was kind of interesting was like I wouldn't necessarily have like if you were to ask me, "Hey, what are the like vibes of different JRPGs?" I don't think I
mm,
would have come up with natural fantasy as one. Which is really
it's
cool though.
tough.
Like because like if you like when I first heard like high fantasy and natural fantasy, like why do you need both of those? But like they really are like
Right.
different. And like one of the things that's cool is like one of the vibes of natural fantasy is that the nature is much bigger than the human, if that makes sense. Like the
The world is wild, right?
and that the relationship between the two is so much of a bigger focus, right? In the high fantasy, it exists in a natural world, but we're not talking about like and the things of the natural world can have an impact, but the relationship between the man-made and the natural is not like such a big focus. You in high
Hmm.
fantasy, I see like you're having warring kingdoms and you're having like political conflict. You're having like Final Fantasy 9 stuff going on, right? In my mind, versus you know the
And
other
then, you
stuff. So
know, doing this exercise of the session zero in Fabula Ultima actually made me realize that the Beast Wilds is a natural fantasy.
hell yeah,
That was those were the dynamics that I said I
yeah,
wanted to play with in my own world building. So this was really great for me just to have like the vocabulary to kind of think this way. The third one I think was the one that we were kind of torn over.
yeah.
Um, that a lot of us were like, yeah, let's do that one, which is the techno
Techno fantasy.
fantasy,
Yeah,
and that's the classic. Like that's like cyberpunk. That's
yeah,
like Final Fantasy
yeah.
VII. Final Fantasy VIII, even I would say, like
Oh yeah.
you have like this like the ultra modernity. There's a lot of like
I
little
honestly
wild
think even
bits and
Final
stuff.
Fantasy VI, maybe.
See, I haven't played that in so
Yeah.
long. I couldn't say, but
Although I
yeah,
don't know. Anyway, but yeah. So like that was really cool. As like one of the things that they hand you up top is here are three umbrella vibes you pick from, and these and all of the stuff they're giving you is like tailor made to set you on the right direction of coming up with the kinds of stuff that should fit under that umbrella, right?
yeah. They're giving you like essentially a set of templates for your world building
Yeah,
so that you're not starting with all three of those and then trying to pick from one of the 100 inspirations split among them.
yeah,
You're starting with one of those and you're trying to pick between like things from like 10 inspirations. Like
right.
it's focusing
um,
everyone in a really nice
and
way.
and one of the things that this all made me think about, um, was a few years back. Bonus Mom and I went to this D&D convention called GaryCon in Wisconsin, and it was very cool. We met a lot of very cool people and had a great time. And in the vendor room one day, we were just chatting with somebody, and we got to talking about different like campaign settings. And I mentioned, and at this point, I was a very new DM. I'd been DMing for maybe a year or two at that point. Got to talking about like my homebrew setting, and somebody asked me a question that no one had ever asked me before, but in hindsight, I should have anticipated, which was, well, like, what makes your setting different from any other fantasy setting, right? Like, basically saying, like, what, like, if you're thinking, because we were talking about how I was thinking about, like, putting my stuff together and, like, putting it out there in the world. And the basic asked me this, like, well, why should someone play in your setting as opposed to somebody else's setting? And I didn't have an answer to that, right? Now, after thinking about it more, I probably could come up with some answers to that, but I realized, like, I was basically just building a setting out of whatever I thought was interesting and cool, right? But in order to, like, nail a vibe or to like pitch it to someone is like why they should care about my setting, I should have an answer to that question of like, well, why should I play in this and not Forgotten Realms, or why should I play in
Mm.
this and not, whatever else, right? And so that's one of the things I noticed immediately with this Fabula Ultimo stuff is it has an answer to those questions. Why should you play in high fantasy? Well, if you want a story that's like this, if you want themes that are like this, if you want a
Right.
vibe that's like this, you play in a high fantasy world. If you want this, you play in a natural fantasy world, right? And that they thought of this in advance and are like handing the tools not just to you as the GM, but to all of the players, right?
Right there, and that's really what this system is all about.
Yeah.
Is is a bunch of people took the time to basically streamline your decisions to adapt that JRPG vibe into a tabletop,
Yeah.
and they did it really well.
Yeah.
That's the spoiler.
Um, and another thing that I think was really cool about having this stuff laid out like this is like when you look at it, it starts to like tease out in my brain the like how you would start to break apart other stuff. So this goes a little bit to the generalizable thing of like, okay, so yes, it's very cool that Fabula Ultima has these particular things in it, about high fantasy, natural fantasy, this and that. We'll get into later like what the world creation, character creation, like world building stuff that they actually put in further down after you make this kind of umbrella decision looks like. But it like suggests in a way how you would start to break apart other stuff to look, okay, like if I wanted to create this vibe or that vibe, if I wanted something to be cosmic horror, I could start to break down what are the elements of that. And like one of the things that jumped out at me was like a little bit of a thing that like I don't know if I even really need to relate this. I have spent a few dozen hours watching Writing Seminars by Brandon Sanderson. I
Mhm.
want to make this clear. I've never read a Brandon Sanderson book, and I basically never intend to. But I have watched him talk for somewhere in the ballpark of 40 hours about writing stories, okay, and how you would do that.
Honestly, you just saved yourself time
Yeah,
from
yeah.
if you had to choose between reading his books or attending 40 hours of his lecture, you're saving yourself a ton of time by just
Just
going
going to a
40
lecture. Well, no,
hours.
so and one of the things that's interesting is like, I couldn't speak to the quality of his work or him as a person, any of that, right? He's obviously an internationally best-selling author and has written a bunch of books, and many people find them to be great books, and other people have criticisms of their whatever. I'm not engaging with any of that. They're just throwing that away.
Right.
But it is interesting to get the perspective of someone who is a professional storyteller and a professional world builder about the craft, right? And so that's kind of what I was going to it for. And one of the things that I noticed was that, like, at certain points, when he's talking about how stories are constructed, he's really talking about like how he engages with a story through an analytical framework as opposed to just like a passive enjoyment, right?
Mm,
And it reminds me, I'm sure you and I would do it this way. My buddy Vincent and I do it this way. When I listen to music, I'm listening to it often analytically, right?
same.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm thinking about what are the rhythms they're using? What's the instrumentation? What's the arrangement? What's the chord progression look like? Like what is happening in the music as opposed to just like letting the vibe of the music wash over me, right? And the
Right.
reason that's important is, right, I can tell what the vibe of the song is, or I can tell what the vibe of a story is. The analytical framework, analyzing something analytically, allows you to pick out like what's causing that effect. When a particular part of a song is like driving really well, right?
Mm,
It's like, okay, what
right.
in the song is making that happen? Maybe it's rhythmic, right? And like my first thing would be like, well, what's going on in percussion? Because that oftentimes is where a lot of the drive is coming from. You could have a song that has no percussion and has a lot of drive. Well, what's happening there? Well, maybe there's kind of a semi-rhythm section happening in the strings that's like really chunking into some like It's like,
Right.
and that's where the drive is coming from, right? So it's like what I'm saying in this long diatribe is one of the things
He's gonna
that
land the plane,
we're gonna
folks.
land the plane. One of the things that seeing this stuff happening in Fabula Ultima, like, helped me realize is like, oh, like you could be analyzing these stories from this kind of framework to start to pick out what are the elements of the story that are contributing to this given vibe, right? And that would
100%.
help you when you're doing your own world building, if you have a vibe in mind to begin with, right? Have command. It's like, how do I put it? The analytical framework helps you realize the elements in question. And once you've realized the elements in question, you can begin to increase your facility with the like technical ability to implement such an element or to use it in a particular way, right?
I would say it. I'm going to say it a slightly different way. Um, it You begin to identify the knobs and dials that
Yeah.
you now are aware of enough to turn.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good metaphor. I like that. I think you've identified the knob, you've the meta knob on which knob to talk about. Okay,
Right.
anyway, enough navel
It's like
gazing. No, 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 go for it.
cool.
You had
Um,
one more navel
one
to
more
gaze.
gaze, one more
One
gaze
more
at my
gaze into the
navel.
navel.
Um,
Oh God,
I can't.
I've just had an idea for a world where like the sun is just a navel that you gaze at in the sky, just a. Anyway, all right. Um,
Hey, that's world building,
as world building,
folks.
baby. Okay, so
So let's talk about the actual like
yes,
mechanical process that we engaged in. You, me,
yeah.
and I think what four other people.
Yeah, you, me, Jacob, Howard, Daniel. I think that was it. I think that was everybody that made it, right?
Okay, so five of us.
Yeah, because I think the other two that are playing weren't able to make that day, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So so four out of the six players and the game master got together
Mm-hmm.
for this session zero, and uh we went through the whole process of identifying those three buckets of fantasy: high fantasy, natural fantasy, techno fantasy. We sort of went through the exercise like we just did now of identifying like the actual works of art, the games themselves that the inspiration that of the buckets contribute to, where you can steal your vibes from, right? A list of that.
Yeah.
and then we settled on natural fantasy, and then we came to this sort of like uh it was a weird mix of being like scripted questions that we each got to answer,
Yeah.
and sort of like an open forum of like, what do you want
Yeah.
kind of questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to back up real quick one last tiny thing. So they
Mm.
give you the three different like broad vibes, right? They also give you these things they call the eight pillars, which
Oh,
are
right, yeah.
like core things that like it's like the umbrella vibe, right? These are things that, to greater or lesser extent, every game in this JRPG inspired TTRPG like genre generally should feature, right? Ancient ruins and harsh lands, a world in peril, clashing communities, everything has a soul, magic and technology, heroes of many sizes and shape. It's all about the heroes, mystery, discovery, and growth. Those are the eight pillars of, and sort of like how D&D has its three pillars of like combat, exploration, social, which it does greater or lesser jobs of, supporting. This gives us eight, which feels like a lot, but it also is like little sliders you can move of like more world in peril, more class and communities. You know what I mean? So I think that's also very useful as like these are all the tools of like the the vibe soup. Like all of them should have some amount or another of this. It's like a recipe, and we're making a big pot of soup, and like these are like big chunks of stuff that everything's gonna get, and then we season it with a few different things. So let's talk about those things because yes, that process was very cool. Looking at the world creation process. So the first thing we did, we decided on our like setting type, which we decided on natural fantasy, which I was not expecting necessarily. And so
Yeah, I don't think
I didn't
anyone
really come
was.
with any preconceived ideas because like all of my thinking before we started was about techno fantasy because that's kind of where I lean more. But I thought it was very cool and very fun to then like we decided on natural fantasy and just like okay, well now I'm coming into this like way more blank slate, right? Which I thought was good.
And I think the first thing that actually kind of happened when we did that, after we all kind of conceded and said let's try and make a natural fantasy,
Yeah.
we had to come up with some sort of like catchphrase or like, keywords that we
Mm,
would build off of
right.
as inspiration for. And I think it was you who suggested world tree, and
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
all
That
were
was
just like, done,
it was world
solid,
shape. The
no
first
more.
thing they did, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So what it says, you world creation. Your first step, shared creation of a game world, also known as a setting, right? You choose your setting type, and then the first thing it tells you is step one: choose a shape for your world. Is it round, flat, regions floating amidst clouds, donut shaped? Like what you might even decide the shape of your world is yet to be discovered. So this was the first thing they told us was to choose a shape. And this was something that I had sort of thought about a little bit in advance. I had like cuz before we started the game, our DM basically pre-warmed us to some of these questions. He's like, "Hey, think about like two or three possible things." One of them was which type of world we wanted to play in, and one of them was the shape of the world. And so I had thought of I think I still have the actual
I think we said
thing
we
here.
wanted a vertical world too.
Uh I think that came after the tree thing, maybe. Maybe it came before. I honestly can't remember. But yeah, I thought yeah, Fabula pitches. Here it is. World shape. I said cube world in all caps. That was my first pitch. Crescent moon world. Space station shape. That was when I was thinking techno fantasy. And then world tree and Destiny Island, Archipelago, and Mainland. So we like had a couple of different things we were pitching around, right? And I think we really came down to choosing between like archipelago of islands vis-a-vis Kingdom Hearts Destiny Island and World Tree, and we kind of landed with natural fantasy on World Tree. Um, and that was a really interesting choice, I thought.
Yeah, same. I think I think we were all maybe a little bit nervous that it would be like, I think first of all, we were all nervous. Like, most of us couldn't think of like something snappy to say.
Yeah.
And the beginning of that whole process, and we're all like, we're not new to this. We're all
Yeah.
playing different kinds of RPGs constantly. So
Yeah.
it was a struggle to adapt to this. But once we got just
Yeah.
2 or 3 words out in the group,
Yeah.
it all really broke apart. I think that's one thing that I think we did a really good job of, because we're all like veteran video gamers and
Yeah.
TTRPGers. So that was easy for us. But cracking that seal on that thing was tough.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, but from World Tree, like the whole point of like using those keywords, I think we nailed it. Which is just like, okay, it's a tree, it's the world. The whole world is just like one giant tree. So everything that we do, the whole map is just like one big tree. Everything is on the tree. We all live on the tree. The tree is the world. Each branch is like a different country or region or whatever.
Yeah.
And just from there, I think we all started to refine uh, like who our characters could or would be,
Yeah.
and sort of how they fit into the tree.
Yeah. I do. One of the other things I think that was cool about this whole situation too was like they do hand you a pretty step-by-step process, right, for all
Yeah.
of this. But then also some of the steps of the process in the kind of like web strategy that we've talked about with the like what must be true stuff, right? That we've done in other sessions of this. Like we started to have other questions of like, okay, this is a world tree. One of the early questions we asked was like, what do the people of this world look like? Right? And we decided on like anthropomorphized animals, basically, right? Just, it's like, well, we're
I think
already
the
in natural fantasy. Like,
I think the first idea that we had was to exclude humanity.
yeah.
And then from there we were like, what if we were just like all like fucking squirrels, man?
Yeah. We were like, okay, well, what if we were critters that lived in a tree, but like fantasticized. So that was, I think, another like that choosing the world tree and the like deciding, we had to decide on like the size and the scope of the tree as well, like there was a lot to choose, but like that choice to make the predominant life forms be anthropomorphized like critters was also really, really cool and started to suggest it was like once we had that, we had to ask a bunch of other questions of like, how big are these creatures relative to the tree? Did these creatures come from, like, are there like crow people and crows? Like, are those both a thing?
Right.
If there are crows, what
We
are the
had a bit of
size
an
of the crows?
Animal
Are they the
Crossing
same size
conundrum.
as the people? Are they bigger or smaller than the people? Like, it led us down this little hop skip of like 4 or 5 or 6 different questions we had to kind of pick. Um, but like in finding the answers to those questions as a group, you know,
We built a
we
world,
built a very
pretty
fun
well
world. Yeah.
fleshed out
Um,
world too.
but yeah, so that was like the group world building tools of this were extremely cool. So we chose a shape. We had to also decide on the role of magic and technology in the setting.
Yeah, that was
Then we
cool.
started to make kingdoms and nations and historical events. And I want to say, I don't know if this was one group creation. Okay. I, um, I actually don't know. Does this say? Yeah, each person. So they do this several times. Once we decide on magic and technology, once we hit step 4, we're creating kingdoms and nations. Each person at the table should contribute at least one kingdom or nation during this step,
That was
providing
fun.
some details about customs and belief. So this was like thinking about the structure of how this went. It was very interesting, right? They hand you up top the 8 pillars. These are building blocks that if you use them will make the vibe of the JRPG stuff work. Then they're like, you got to make the big umbrella decision of what type of setting you're going to be in, right? Then you're making a couple more umbrella decisions about the shape of your setting and the world. You're making some decisions about what it actually looks like the
And
map
now
of
you're
itself.
deciding like the social groups, basically.
And then once you've
the
got through
factions.
magic and technology decisions, right? All of which, those big things, the shape, the actual, like what it looks like on a map, and then the role of technology and magic and the relationship. Once we kind of had those in place, we moved into this phase where it was like each person was essentially like pitching and in a kind of non-vetoable way was saying like, okay, I'm going to create this thing in the world, right? This kingdom or nation or group or whatever, right?
And that's not
Um,
to say that like none of us, I don't think any of us would have vetoed anything that we
right.
suggested. But like I think that after each of us contributed, everybody like basically commented and sort of collaborated
Yeah.
with the thing that they put forward, which I thought we did pretty well.
Yeah, right.
Like someone
100%.
would say, I want I want like a group of like fungi industrialists who live in the rotting leaves at the roots of this giant world tree.
Right.
And everyone was like, "Oh, that's cool. What if it was like, there was some sort of interchange with the higher portions, and
Right.
like due to like verticality, you had some sort of like caste systems
Yeah.
involved." And it was cool.
Yeah, and even just like we were talking a bit about like just the practicalities of like higher up the tree you'd have more access to sun and light, and like that could be more of a feature of how they're getting energy and food and things like that. And then at the bottom of the tree it's more about, fungus and decay, and like not in like an evil necessarily way, but it's just a different source of, like, and we kind of worked that in
energy,
the world
yeah.
building as well, right?
That
Um
we sort of made the magic that sort
yes.
of yin yang
Yeah.
kind of like sunlight
Um
is one source, and sort of like the transmuted sunlight in organisms that decay is another
yeah,
one.
kind of, yeah. So yeah, but that was really cool, and like that was one of the things about this group world building thing that I think is to like we wanted to talk about how can that be translatable, right? Like if you're not just playing Fabula Ultima, which again we highly recommend, and if you're not just straight up stealing some of these world building techniques.
Which
Bonus one
I
mass,
think
how many
you
people
should.
were involved in this process? Five or six, something like
Five
that.
of us, yeah.
So it was me, Beast, Jacob, Daniel, and Howard. All of which bonus mom knows. If you're watching this after the fact, you don't know those people, and that's fine. Um, but one of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about was like, okay, I think lots of people come up with the idea of group world building, right? And like, what were the tools that this game gave us to do the group world building with, right? One of the things we kind of noticed early on was like the early part of what we're doing, the 8 pillars and deciding on the setting and then answering some of the big questions about our setting, about the shape and the technology and magic and all that. Those all are like, I think, designed to get the group kind of on the same page with the
Mm,
vibe of what's happening, right? Before
totally.
you start individually putting stuff into the mix, right? So that like you've established this baseline of like these are the elements of this genre, these are the kind of like big level things that we're doing to make sure we're all on the same page, so that when we got to the point where people were putting in ideas, nobody was like throwing something that threw the vibes off from like way out of field or whatever, out of pocket or whatever you want to say, right? Everybody was kind of like, every time somebody came up with something, everyone was like, oh yeah, like that's, yeah, you know what I mean? And I think it was because the game, through its own structure of how it handles this session zero stuff, set us
Mm,
up for success by making sure we had like gotten into alignment on those big things up top, right? Before we
right.
started getting into, okay, I'm going to put a thing in here and you're going to put a thing in, you know what I mean?
And that's a I think something that's cool is the way that it's organized is from general to specific, but also from uh I think maybe a good way to think of it is like from like cosmic to the individual.
Yeah.
So you're starting off with this like extremely mystic like phrase that's going to invoke the rest of your world,
Right.
and ours was world tree.
Right.
And then from that you just start popcorning ideas around until the
Yeah.
rest of it trickles down, and at the end of that we all made our characters together
Yeah.
with the like in not in collaboration but like at the same time,
Yeah.
so that we were like making suggestions and saying like overhearing people say what their character was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to use something that you said in mine,
Right.
and literally taking the world building and like matriculating
Yeah.
it down
And one of the
into the
things that I
individual.
thought was really cool and kind of genius, and almost certainly an intended potential that the developers of the game came up with, was that like the people who, when we went to go make characters, almost everyone, if not everyone, made a character who involved specific things they had put in the setting to begin with.
Yeah,
Right.
it's true, true.
Right.
Which is like so natural,
Of
right?
course, it's because like they put it in there. Obviously, they thought it was cool. You
Right.
know, like
So what was
yeah,
the
yeah,
who was the character that you made, and what was their
sure,
connection to the thing that you suggested?
yeah. So my character, it was like a little cat girl who is like she kind of fits like an anime JRPG role of like a sidekick character who's like a tinkerer and an experimenter who like does
Mm.
stuff with technology, but who is also kind of like zany and wild and out of control. You know what I mean? Very impulsive, like that sort of like, whoa, gosh, gee, what? Ah, you know, like that kind of a character, right? But her thing is that
So like
she,
Minnie Mouse Riku, like
yeah. So she is a like, her whole thing is that she is like always looking for interesting little gizmos and gadgets in the ancient ruins, and the thing I put into the world were these ancient ruins, right? One of the things that I put in the world was that there were people at one point. I forget what they were called, Lyrians or something. We named them something.
yeah.
Jacob just asked me a question about them today. Daldrin, that's right, the Daldrin. Anyway, basically, I put this thing in that there were people in the world and they turned into pixies. Somehow, we don't know how.
Right.
Nobody knows. They used to have this big civilization, and then they got turned into pixies, and so now there are no normal people, but there are like
little
sprite people with wings,
like
Tinkerbell. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. All of the people in the world were got to turn into Tinkerbells, and then the world was taken over
Dope.
by animals.
Dope,
Yeah.
dope.
Not me lurking, praying something slips for our campaign. It's locked up tight stuff. It's locked up tight. There ain't no way, but I appreciate it. But anyway, so that's my character. Is that like she? So her deal is that she goes into the ruins looking for cool stuff, and I was the one that put the Daldrin ruins into the thing, right?
Right.
Daniel's was really cool. He made the Bark Guard.
The Bark Guard.
Yeah,
right.
he came up with this like order of knights, and we all kind of workshopped the name and landed on the Bark Guard. But they're sort of like their job is to protect the tree and stuff. And he made this like
they're like
insect
beetles,
character, yeah,
right?
like a
They're
horned
like
beetle guy,
people.
right, or something. Who's like a knight, and like that is such a cool character, man. That's so cool. What did you? What? And he was of course the one that came up with the Bark Guard. And it wasn't just the one thing. It often was several pieces, right? What about yours?
Okay, so the faction or the group
Kingdom.
that I suggested was the Wicker Palace, and basically it's a giant crow's nest at the very top of the tree.
Right.
So they're all like high and mighty because they're like, we're on the top and everyone's beneath us. So like, the hierarchy is established by the material world. We're the best. And because they're avian, they can fly around and basically snatch up anything shiny. And so they're like, they basically like, in their imagination, they're hoarding relics.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of things that your character would be looking for in the ruins of the Daldrin.
Yeah.
And it's random stuff like sewing needles and like wristwatches. My character is a crow, and he has decided to also delve these same ruins to look for sources of pigment that he can use to invent books, basically. He is an illuminator. He basically makes book illustrations.
That's cool. Yeah, and then Howard's character, Howard did this whole thing of creating the idea that like the veins of water that flow through the tree, and the scale of the tree is like, if you're on one of the bigger branches, it might take you like a week to walk across the thing, like not from trunk to the end of the limb, but just width wise, or like really big, right? So in that sense, the veins of water that flow through the tree could be like the size of like underground like rivers,
like subways.
Yeah,
and stuff.
basically.
Right.
And so he created this whole like a lot of the waterborne creatures like otters and things like that can be like amphibious and sometimes not, will travel inside the tree itself through these caverns of like wooden waterways. And so he made a character who was like an otter, who was a member of this like merchanty kind of an organization that like travels and trades between parts of the different tree by using this sort of like water based thing, you know. And so anyway,
Yeah, he
all of that
basically
is to
added
say,
highways to the world, which
yeah.
is so dope.
Was every character an animal-based species? Yes, lady stuff. We touched on this earlier. We were playing this game Fabula Ultima, which is like a JRPG based TTRPG. And the first thing we decided on was natural fantasy was the like overarching vibe of the world, which is very like Miyazaki, very like what was the other one you said?
Oh, oh my gosh,
Uh
what was the other one? I said, oh, Fern Gully.
Fern Gully, Miyazaki, that kind of stuff, right? So then we like one of the first things we decided in world creation is shape of the world, which we picked world tree. And then we made it be a literal tree, not the sort of more metaphorical tree of like English or whatever.
No, straight up,
And
the whole
that
world is
being
one
in the tree idea led us to what if the main variety of being on the tree is not like people, but is like anthropomorphized animals, right? And so that's why everybody was animal based. Is because there basically are no people, except there kind of are, but they're just pixies now. All of
Right.
the normal people have turned into pixies.
It's just animals and
So,
Tinkerbells.
yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, so we kind of did
And
this,
that's
right?
what
So,
5 dudes came up
yeah,
with.
exactly.
Enthusiastically.
So, yeah, and like, so what was really cool about this was like the way of this world building of like, it got us all on the same page with the bigger vibe questions, and then had us each populate the world with specific stuff, and they did kingdoms and nations, historical events, enigmas and mysteries, threats, and I think they did factions. I think Jacob added factions to that as well. Um, and that is the thing I think is more generalizable. Like you could do this in any kind of RPG game you would like to, I think, right? And sort of what we identified as the steps of that were to decide on what the vibe is, figure that part out, figure out like what are those when we they talked about those 8 pillars, what are the kind of pillars of your vibe, right? And your setting, and then get on the same page with that stuff, which may or may not include some of these same things like if you're running a Call of Cthulhu type like cosmic horror or eldritch horror campaign, the shape of your world is probably not going to be all that important, right? But maybe choosing which era of time it's predominantly concerned with might be, for instance, right? Okay, so you get on the same page with that big stuff, and then giving everybody an opportunity to populate the world with their ideas, kingdoms and nations, historical events, enigmas, mysteries, and threats. Again, all those things were like everyone like gave these really cool ideas, and we didn't have a lot of friction between like what people were suggesting because we had gotten on the same page with the big stuff, if that makes sense.
And just each being able to contribute our own part of the world.
Yeah.
And the fact that we all built things that were spread out enough that we found ways for them to like be connected
Mm-hmm.
without them like butting heads or overlapping.
Yeah.
So we gave each other a lot of room, and we filled it in gradually. And I'm sure just even by playing it, we're going to be doing some world building like on the fly.
And you and I actually talked a little bit about some of this stuff beforehand in terms of, as we're talking about the idea of like generalizing some of this stuff, what are some steps that a person might take if they wanted to do something similar, not necessarily in this game, but if you wanted to do some group world building with a group, right? Like, what are some steps that you could take? We've already kind of identified that first one of like knowing the style and genre touch points, right?
Well, let's,
for
let's
what
talk
you're trying
about how
to do.
you do that, maybe.
Yeah.
I think the first thing to know is that whoever you pull into a group, you kind of have to have some sort of feeling as to their baseline of like media from which they can like tropify things.
Yeah.
Like you are probably going to know if your friends know about the Lord of the Rings, or if
Right.
they know about Miyazaki films, or if they know about cyberpunk,
Right.
because you're friends, right?
Yeah.
So that's the baseline. you would hope that you all sort of have a little bit of overlap to pick like a central thing, which is usually going to be a video game or a movie or a book series,
Yeah.
to say like we all kind of know about that. And if they don't, I think something that you could do is to say, as the game master, to say, I know the Lord of the Rings so well, so well. And I think that I could really bring you a great high fantasy world experience. So I'm going to take the first step of trying to limit everyone to high fantasy and say, everybody in the next week, go home and watch a Lord of the Rings movie or read a Lord of the Rings book if
Right.
you're crazy. And then we'll have a session zero on that ground level, right? You're
Yeah.
basically giving them a little bit of homework ahead of time. Think of it like a session -1 for the session zero. That's one way that you could do
Yeah.
it. What's another way you think that would work for you all?
Yeah. So, real quick, just to acknowledge, we got rated. Vincent Page, welcome in, buddy.
Yo.
Also, somebody asked us, curious on your thoughts about how to go about integrating world building with already established settings. That was actually the topic of our last stream, which is called "How to World Build in a World You Didn't Build."
Yes.
So if you're interested in that, go check out our YouTube, which I hope will come up when I push these buttons. Did it work? It did! Hooray! So yeah, you can find that. So anyway, welcome in, Raiders. We are talking about the world building tools that we got a chance to interact with in our buddy Jacob Session Zero for his short Fabula Ultima campaign. We are an hour or so into this, almost. So
the elevator
yeah.
pitch, Fabula Ultima is a TTRPG tool set that uses a very streamlined and group world building system based on JRPG
Yeah.
tropes in different genres of JRPGs.
Right. It's
that
very much
collaborate on with your group, the GM and the players together. You answer a bunch of questions and you build a world that you then build characters to exist in. And we've gotten to the point where we're now trying to explain maybe some things you could steal or that we think that we're going to steal from the experience.
Exactly.
And that maybe you could use in your own games or world building sessions.
And one of the main ones, because that we're talking about, because this system did such a great job with it, is group world building. So we were talking about before you hit into session 1, doing some work of getting on the same page about like media references and thinking like what vibes of the world you're looking to make. And maybe even doing some homework if you, depending on how well you know the people in your group and how many touchstones you guys have together. If you find out you don't have as many touchstones together, maybe working on getting some, you got
to build your vocabulary.
Yeah, build your vocabulary a bit. One of the other things you could look at is some like icebreaker type tools, or just doing typical session 0 stuff about like safety tools and limits and things like that, as well as using that turn-based input that we talked about from the Fabula Ultima stuff, in terms of like people putting ideas out for, not even just parts of the setting, but even like references that you're pulling from, or elements that you guys want to include and stuff like that. What else did we talk about?
I think so knowing your group is sort of a big hurdle,
Yeah. And we've been playing with this group for a couple of years now and have played several different RPGs, several different genres of games.
We're pretty good at this as a group. I would say this is a really we're a pretty high level in terms of that the group cohesion. So I think a lot of the smoothness we could say is on us, but truly this system is designed to make it as easy for any group as possible.
Yeah.
So knowing your group, that's kind of like the first thing that we want to highlight.
Yeah.
You can't world build together effectively if you aren't building off of each other's ideas well. And you have to be able to conceive of and comprehend each other's ideas easily in order to do that well.
Yeah.
So that's
and I think
part of it.
Another thing with this, when you hear people talk about tabletop RPGs in general, um, one of the things that often comes up is people will be asking for advice about how to solve different problems they've run into in their gaming group. And one of the sort of like funny cheat codes and like ironies of the whole thing, it's like tabletop role playing games have this kind of like undeserved reputation as being kind of an antisocial thing. Like, oh, it's just these people in the basement and they, right. They don't really have friends and know how to communicate and all of that. And it's like, there may be people who fit in that bucket, but the truth is that it's a very social thing, right? You are like group storytelling together. You're making these decisions. You're running these characters, all that stuff, right? So the answer to those questions of how to resolve conflict is almost always talk about it like adults, right? Is just sit down and talk about it and behave like adults, which for some people is very hard to do. So one of the things that when you're looking at how to translate that little nugget into this group world building stuff is you got to be chill. You just got to be fucking chill. Okay. Right. And the way that I kind of mean that is like when we went into the process, I was most interested in the techno fantasy world. Right. But the group decided they wanted to do natural fantasy in an alternate universe where I'm like a dickhead. Right. I could have gotten all upset about that. Right. Because I was really wanting to do this and everybody didn't want to do that. But instead, right, I said, okay, cool, great. Like, how do I participate and make that fun, right? And like, so, and not just that, but like any decision, right? If somebody else puts something in the world, like what I'm saying, you got to be chill. You can't get too invested, and you can't want to have too much control. You have to be willing to be social and collaborate. You have to be willing to like let your ideas take a back seat. Like, let's say you wanted to put something in the world that was about what the birds are like in the world, and somebody else comes in and says, I think the birds are like this. Right? Like you might pitch your own idea and say, well, maybe could we do it like this? But if everybody kind of decides that like they like their idea better than yours, like your group world building, like don't get too invested in any one idea that you have. You got to be willing to go with the flow. And one of the things that I think was cool about how this did all of that, this particular system, was everybody got their chance to kind of put their own indelible, sort of unvetoable touch on the setting. But because it did all the pre-work of getting us on the same page to begin with, right, we had remarkably little conflict about any of that stuff, right? So in the idea of like, if you're going to try and do this thing, not using Fabula Ultima and just taking these ideas, one of the things that we kind of talked about was, it's like if you're running this as a GM or a player, whatever, having a conversation up front, this kind of goes in the icebreaker setting of like making sure everybody's on the same page of being chill. Right? Make sure everybody knows we're doing this together. If we choose one idea,
gets their chance.
Everybody gets their chance. Piece. And if we choose one idea over another, like we don't think your idea is bad. We don't hate you. You're not a loser. It's just like we decided we liked this instead of that, and that's kind of fine. But also then the way everyone will still get their opportunity. It's not we're going to veto every idea you have. Everybody gets their chance to have a mark on it, but also be cool. Don't get too invested in any one thing that you derail the whole thing, because you can't handle it.
This could also be a really interesting exercise for folks. If you suggest something and it doesn't, it's an idea that doesn't win in the group, you have now identified something that is more appealing than the first idea you had. And that's a really useful thing for you to now have essentially peer review on an idea against another idea. You now can refine your idea to be more appealing, or to say like, maybe I was going to have fun with this, but clearly I was the only one, or the amount of fun other people perceived it to be was less. So either I need to adapt it to make it more fun and appealing to other people so that we can include it, which is that's useful. That's a good thing. Right.
And alternatively, you could always squirrel that idea away in your own little book of ideas to be the kernel of something else later.
Be jealous, guard it.
Yeah, but like, to like in the way that we talk about sometimes the idea of like you have the kernel and you use the web, you can always do your own web if you think that idea is really cool. Like you can run with that and make your own stuff,
Right.
and
That's what homebrew's
yeah,
for. Like,
right. So, and then one of the last things we wanted to talk about was how this game did kind of
mm.
the collaborative character creation. We've touched on it a little bit, but
We've mostly been focusing at the level of the
yeah,
world. Now I think it's cool to show or to explain to folks how we made a world that then basically built a lot of our characters for us. Like the
yeah,
process of world building actually helped us create interesting
yeah.
individuals.
And so looking at like what the game offers for group creation was very interesting. They offer kind of a few archetypes of like what is the party's deal. Our
Mm,
group decided on um essentially a situation where like it's similar to a thing I've done before where like everybody in the party has a connection to someone else, kind
mm,
of. And we only did single connections instead of double connections, by which I mean two, like there were four players, the other two weren't at the session. And like we each decided to be connected to one other person. The way I
right.
usually do it when I'm running campaigns is decide like everybody picks one person they have a connection with, right? And then that person has to pick someone else that they have a connection with so that there's like a little bit more of a two-way web. Um anyway, but going back to what the game offers you, it offers you the archetypes such as brought together by fate, guardians, where like one player is the chosen one and everyone else is the sort of like a Final Fantasy X model, right? Yuna and the Guardians, the Summoner and the Guardians.
Right.
Heroes of the Resistance, revolutionaries, seekers, desperately searching for someone or something. So it gives you a couple of, and these are all, of course, taken
These are
straight
group
from
dynamics. Yeah.
group dynamics, straight from JRPGs, of course. Like we can
Exactly.
literally
Yeah.
brought together by fate. You find yourselves working together because of the circumstances. Chrono Trigger, Guardians, Final Fantasy X, Heroes of the Resistance. You were the last line of defense against a terrible power, a darkness that threatens to envelop the known world. Final Fantasy
I
Two,
mean,
Revolutionaries,
one,
Final
two,
Fantasy
three,
Seven,
four.
Seekers. You were desperately searching for someone or something. Grandia 2, maybe? Arc the Lad,
Arc the
maybe?
Lad. Yeah.
You know. Although that one has like two different
Oh,
parties who I think have
maybe
different
like
things.
Vagrant Story.
Yeah, I haven't played that one, but you know. Yeah.
So
So
few have.
anyway, so these are, and again, these are things that like you could decide for any non-Fabula Ultima JRPG. Like if you're doing a D&D party, often like the way that this ends up being in my like campaigns is like, all right, we decide if you all know each other or if you don't know each other, and that's basically how I do it, right? Like, but this
Right.
actually gives us a lot more flavors
Like
of that.
archetypes.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot more archetypes, which I think is something that we all could maybe benefit from in the form of pitching these ideas to our players, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Anytime you can refine things into categories so that you're essentially giving canned uh answers or like choices to folks.
yeah,
I think it just makes the effort way easier because everyone's going to have two or three that they find really interesting,
yeah,
and where those tend to overlap in your group is where I think you're going to find the most inspiration
yeah,
naturally, so it sort of works itself out. I think it's
yeah.
a really
And of
cool idea.
course, people always can go off book and just decide different stuff. They can pitch their own stuff back at you, and it's whatever. But I do like this idea of like thinking about what are some like party dynamic groups. One of the things I think that is interesting is this Guardians one is normally a thing that like every time I see tabletop role playing game advice, almost, and you're doing like homebrew and adventures and stuff, they almost always say like don't choose one of your characters to be a chosen one, right?
Yeah,
But what's really interesting is if your players decided that, if they're the ones that like, no, Final Fantasy X is great,
then run with
and
it.
it's also interesting in Final Fantasy X that the main character is not the chosen one, right?
Right,
In that way.
right.
But so that's like, oh, that's an interesting touch point that I never would have really thought about outside of this context of JRPGs of being like, actually, I kind of wonder what that like. You know what I mean? Um.
I,
Also,
I
Heraldry, thank you for the follow.
nice.
It's something that I'm leery of, but I'm also like, I don't know, maybe. I also think it might work better in Fabula Ultima than other things because it explicitly is a JRPG thing. But
Well,
you know.
my style of GMing is to give players what I think they want, as
Yeah.
often as I can, while pretending that I'm holding it away from them.
Yeah. I do also think one of the things that in my mind with that idea of Final Fantasy X that makes this maybe more interesting is like the chosen one not being like the all powerful chosen hero, but someone that needs protecting because only they can do a
Mm,
specific task seems way more interesting to me than
right.
because I think a lot of times when they do
Then
this
one of
chosen
you
one
is
thing, it's like
Superman.
somebody is Superman or somebody has one secret special power. And this idea of like framing it as guardians, it's like the person who needs to do the thing is weak and frail and must be protected. Like it's just inherently to me more interesting. Anyway, um, yeah. So we talked about the collaborative character creation stuff that they give us. So one of the things is deciding on this group dynamic, and then the other one of the other things is that we kind of had happen to us was as we were creating our characters and tying into certain elements that we had put into the world. That kind of led our characters to tie themselves to different members of the group with these kinds of connections, right? Um, like my character that's always going around looking for these ruins. I think one of the things that we sort of said was some of the ruins are more prevalent on the internal parts of the tree. So it made sense that my character was friends with the otter who
Right.
travels through in the internal parts of the tree and stuff. Or was just a trader who might like, I like these little gadgets. He might find these gadgets and sell them. It's like, so there were certain things like that that suggested these connections between characters. Um, Another thing that we talked about a little bit was doing this group world building massively increased our like PC buy-in to the setting,
Right.
right?
Like
Which
as a
we've touched on.
character, yeah, creating our
Yeah,
characters, we I think we mentioned that like we basically all kind of like we had contributed something to the game and inevitably our character was sort of
tied to that.
derived from that
Yeah,
and
which
that's I mean
yeah,
which felt so natural but also we all wanted to increase the I think the access to like the part of our world
right,
through our characters,
exactly.
which
And
was
the other
fantastic.
thing that was really interesting to me is like looking at it as a GM. Oftentimes, when you have like when you've gone off and made a setting alone, or when you are working in an existing setting and a character comes and says, okay, I want to make a character who is, you know, the last living member of an order of knights. And you, at that point, you're like, okay, I either have to like set aside time to have a whole conversation with this person and we co create the order of knights. And I help shape that so that it fits into the world I already made or the setting I'm already using, right? Or I just have to go write all that stuff and send it to the player or whatever, right? And in that second scenario, it's like how bought in is that character? Like they had the idea for the character, but it's like the way that this thing of us building the specific things and then largely tending to make our characters based on those things massively increased that buy-in. And also it's like it's not like there's a bunch of secret information about the thing that like there's not a whole lot of lore that the DM knows before we make the characters and then we have
Right.
to retrofit it. It's like, no, we made the thing and then made the people to go in the thing. It's like that was just a really smooth process and worked really, really well. And I think deserves calling out as far as part of like what you gain from doing it this way, which seems like it has a lot of requirements. You have to like be on the same page, get the same vibes. You have to like have shared touchstones of what all that means. You have to identify the elements of how you even go about doing that. But one of the main huge things we feel like we got from it, aside from it just being fun to create stuff together and feeling like we made a cool setting, was everybody's character feels really, really tied into the setting, and all the players feel very invested in, at the very least, the parts of the setting they made. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it didn't require a lot of work from the GM to like go invent these factions or retrofit things in the world to fit our decisions or anything like that. Like that was just a really smooth, cool process. So
100%.
hell yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to hit on with this?
No, I honestly I think we nailed all of the eight pillars, the things that we really like that you should be trying to do. If I guess if I just had to summarize the last what hour and 20 minutes, I would say something to the effect of um, a really cool way to have fun playing in a world is to make it with the people who are going to be playing in it.
Yeah.
Instead of making it ahead of time by yourself, like the little, introverted weirdos that we are, just out of just pulling that tapeworm out of our imagination. Get together with your friends,
Yeah.
ask them what they like, and be chill and let everyone do add something, and you might make something kind of cool.
Yeah. And then, oh God, I had some. Oh, and the thing that I had to say was, I like. First of all, I would recommend trying to play Fabula Ultima. It looks really cool and seems pretty intuitive. One of the things we didn't touch
100%.
on was every character is required to multi-class, which is kind of
That
crazy.
was
It's like you
cool.
start at level 5 and you multi-class these different characters. Like you can do
And there's like
2 levels of
30
one and 3 levels of others.
classes.
There's a bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then when you select one of the different kinds of worlds, you add on a few extra classes that are kind of designed to fit within that world. Very cool stuff. Highly recommend anyone check it out. It did make all the characters, like, you have a lot of customization to be able to feel like you made your character very, like, whatever archetype you want to try to do, you can kind of find it.
But it also, because you're multi-classing, every character ends up being pretty distinct.
Yes,
Like
100%.
just because there's so many combinations of classes and things
Yeah.
to choose from, that everyone's character inevitably is different than
Yep.
the other.
But the last thing I wanted to say was, like, I think just doing the world building was fun as hell. I'm very excited to play
It
the
was
game.
so cool.
But honestly, if you don't feel like you have a GM that can, like, run this, I think it would be a fun thing to do with your friends, just to go through the world creation and maybe even the character creation for it. So, and I think would help explicate a lot of the stuff we've said today. Like, I think it would be kind of
Right.
hard to just
Learn by
listen to
doing.
us talk about this and then take these principles and use them. But I think if you got yourself a hold of the Fabula Ultima rulebook and went through it with some people, it would be like, work those muscles. I think it would be a lot of fun, and you might learn some things about some world building. So,
And you might get something out of it that we didn't talk about.
100%.
And in that case, that's pretty cool.
There's another game. Was it Microscope? I think we played it on stream a couple times.
Yeah.
Where you kind of
yeah.
do like a fictitious history thing that was kind of similar. It was the same unvetoable decision making stuff was happening. It didn't do as good of a job of, like, getting you on the same page with vibes up front, but it kind of makes me want, like, doing this kind of makes me want to go back and play that again with some different groups of people. But anyway, yeah, that's what we got today. Thank you, folks. We're talking about the world building options you have in Fabula Ultima and what we can learn about that for world building in general. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it for us today. I don't think does anyone in chat know anyone they would like us to go and raid? If not, I may just call it a night, because I don't see anybody on my list of folks necessarily. Going once, going twice.
Sold.
Okay, folks. Yeah, we're just gonna call it a night. Thank you all for hanging out. I appreciate you very much. This will be put up on YouTube if you want. If you've, like, came in with the raid and want to go see the earlier stuff we were talking about, we're gonna put that up in the next couple of days. So, and then we'll be back hopefully next month. We missed last month, but who cares? We'll hopefully be back sometime next month with whatever we're doing for the next world building. So, all right, peace out, guys.
Let me tell a tale of a world where heroes walk among us, fighting through the darkness left by monsters and by selfish men. A tale of glory rents asunder, sacrifice and battles lost. Our heroes know not what awaits them, and still they carry on. Let me sing a song